In this video, I will be discussing the process of modular assets. So what are they? Essentially, they are 3D objects which can be combined together to create more complicated environments, scenes, props, etc. It kind of adds a lot of variety to a scene. Essentially, the way you got to look at it is it's kind of like Lego bricks. You know how Lego bricks can kind of snap together to create, like, say, an environment or a unique object, for instance. Even say like a puzzle piece as well. Same thing with these. So for instance, I have these four assets here. Floor and some variations of walls. And what I can do is I can duplicate these and move them across. And you see that they snap together, kind of like a Lego brick. And hopefully you can see the whole idea of this. I can just essentially duplicate these four objects across and create a seamless variety of rooms. So I could essentially create a whole floor, a whole ground floor for like a house or a bungalow, for instance, or create various different rooms to make, like, say, a mansion or even like a larger room, for instance. Modular assets are a really great and efficient way of creating environments, both interior and exterior, rather than me just getting, like, say, a cube like this one here, making it bigger and trying to sort of adding edge loops, curve it to make it look like a cave or make it look like a really cool sort of interior for a mansion. This essentially breaks it down into a really simple process, only having about 3 or 4 different variations of models, which you just duplicate and move across. So if I just unhide it, for instance, right now, you can see here that with just these 4 original assets, just duplicate them across, move them around, and I create a nice, simple little room, which is quite nice. Really quickly, I will show you the whole process of this. Now, one of the most important things about creating modular assets, and it's a really hard thing to get right, is making use of the grid. So for instance, right now, if I go to my grid settings, I'll go to real world size, so I've got 1000, this should be 100 actually. There you go. 1000 by 100 it should be. And I have subdivisions at 10. So I have this cube here. So for instance, let's recreate this wall here. Now what I need to do is I'm going to start off by going to the faces. Now we need to make sure that we are keeping within the lines of the grid. This is basically our reference. Now right now, if I just move it, I can kind of meet up with that line, but it's not a great idea. What I should be doing is using the snap to grid option. So for instance, if I hold X, you'll notice that the pivot in the middle turns like a little circle. This indicates that right now we are snapping to grid. So every time I make a movement, no matter how small or big it is, it's gonna always meet up with the lines. So for instance, if I just go here like that to the end, just make this really quick, I now have a wall that is exactly 1 meter across and about 50 centimeters high. Then what I can do is just quickly make this about 2 meters high. Actually, what about a meter? Be about right. And you see now that I have a wall. Now it's always important as well is to make sure that the pivot is in the appropriate location. Now this is probably the most trickiest thing about modular assets, is getting this in the right location, because sometimes it can mess it up, because you might end up with something like this, for instance. If I just turn that off for a second, if your pivots aren't correct, then you might get some slight little seams here, or you may have some intersections, for instance. So for instance, these two are actually overlapping a little bit. At the moment we can't really see that, but in engine you'll notice some sort of flickering and clipping issues with that. So it's really important to get the pivot in the correct location. Now to do that, what we can do is you can go to modify and center pivot. So that goes right in the middle of our object. But we can do something, we can actually move this to a location that we want. By pressing insert on your keyboard, you'll notice now that the pivot looks quite different. What I can do now is I can move the pivot where I want. But again, as you can see, it's not really snapping to grid. So all I gotta do is hold down X. I'm gonna undo really quick. And what I can do is I can move it within the grid. So it'll be snapping to the grid. So for instance, maybe something like that, for instance, and press insert, that locks into place. So now if I duplicate, hold on X, hopefully this should now line up. Sweet. There are a few things you should take into consideration as well. So for instance, with these walls here, I haven't really taken consideration the corners. So I haven't really made like a curve, for instance. So you can notice right here that I'm having some issues with this particular wall right now. It's slightly misaligned. So that's going to cause issues when it comes to actual gameplay. You'll notice like, hang on, this wall isn't even right in the center. So I might have to kind of move that across. There's nothing I can do right now. The main reason is because, again, having to curve it. So what I did was I just basically duplicated it and turned it 90 degrees, which didn't really work as well as you would hope it would. So it's always a good idea to kind of have a model which does have a curve that kind of nicely curves into a 90-degree where you can just continuously, seamlessly add in your modular assets. I would say play around and experiment with it. Modular assets are an essential tool. They make the modeling process for like an environment so much easier. I'll show you some quick examples of some previous work that I've done as well. So for instance, these are some modular assets. Again, these aren't perfect at all, which you can do for like an exterior environment. And again, here's a great example as well. These are some modular assets for a tree. So for instance, I've got the actual base of the tree there, and I have a variety of different branches to the tree. And what I can do is I can make some slight variations of trees. So you can see here I've got 3 variations. Again, that's the really great idea. That's a really great thing about modular assets. It adds that variety to models. Same with these sort of smaller ones as well. Again, much more variety rather than just like a default one tree that you constantly duplicate over and over and over again. And a final example that I'll showcase is something that I've done myself as well. These are various different walls for like, say, like an old medieval hut. So you can see here that these are all basically made up of the same walls. So all these walls here and these little decals as well, just been duplicated across, moved around to create different styles and different variations of sort of an old medieval house. And again, it does add that variation. It's not a fantastic amount of variation, granted, but do play a lot of games, you'll notice that there are going to be a lot of similar buildings. Skyrim is a great example of that. A lot of the buildings, like say the inns, for instance, all the exteriors look pretty much almost exactly the same. There's some slight variations here and there, but you can't have unique buildings all the time, which we don't really have in real world anyway. Go to any sort of area of Bradford, most houses look kind of the same, old sort of terrace houses. So you don't have to suspend your disbelief too much with that. I can even see as well, I put some variation of textures in there as well. So it's got like 2 shades, one for like wood, one for bricks as well. But yeah, all these houses were just essentially made out of just these assets. And you can see here as well that I have attempted to do sort of like a corner as well, so that, which in theory should make these walls seamlessly go across to avoid the earlier issue that I had with this wall here. And one thing I would suggest as well for reading material, again, these are just some little examples of modular assets. It's a really great idea just kind of like Google modular assets, just to get some inspiration on how you should do it. Now, I would highly recommend checking out these 3 things. Gamer Sutra has an article on creating modular assets. This is from 2005, so it's over a decade old now, but the thought process is still exactly the same. It's still the foundations of modular assets. And it does talk about having to work in the grid. So it's talking about working in the power of 2, for instance. Make sure it's aligned to the grid, avoiding the sort of Z buffering issues there. Even talking about how to actually measure it as well. The whole idea of the pivot as well, like where to place it. And even stuff on curvature as well. So it's a great read there. Also, as you can see here, Joel Burgess, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, who is a senior level designer at Bethesda, has done a GDC talk back in 2013. This is transcript, which basically talks about Bethesda's approach to modular assetting. So he does talk about how Skyrim and even Fallout uses it. So if you kind of scroll down, it does go into great detail about what you can do in modular assetting. So for instance, in Skyrim, you can kind of see, I think this is Morrowind, I believe, or maybe Oblivion. You can see here with these sort of pedestals here, there's not really a great amount of variation. You can see it's just been duplicated across a lot of times. But in Skyrim, they kind of fixed that issue. You might be able to see it here in this image if it actually loads up. Yeah, there is a lot of sort of copy and paste stuff there, but they try to add as much variation as possible. You can actually see it here as well. So for instance, this has pretty much been duplicated like 3 times just to create this sort of like big spiral that the player can kind of walk across. But again, it is trying to add in that variation there as well. Then this is a great article to read through because it goes into depth of what Bethesda's approach to modular assetting is. Even talking about, say, scaling as well. It's a great way of looking at it. So again, they have got somewhat man-made interiors, but it does go into detail about, if I scroll down a little bit, it goes into detail about caves as well, like what their approach is to caves, and even like, say, hiding some issues. So for instance, to add a little bit of variation, you can add some more assets around there to kind of break up the monotony of a room. You can even use these assets to kind of hide issues as well. So for instance, I've done somewhat similar with my houses here, using these assets, not just give a bit of variation to the room as well, but also hide the seams as well. And finally, I would suggest also to go onto GDC YouTube channel. There's actually a Fallout 4 modular asset level design presentation. Again, I believe it's by the same person. I think it's by Joel as well. This Bethesda's talk about modular assets. So I would highly recommend watching this to go into even greater depth with modular assets.